Welcome to Shatter.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like strategy. That's what I noticed first. Not what she said, but how she stopped saying it. The pauses. The smirks. The way she watched me the way a scientist watches an experiment. Not with empathy, but with curiosity. I used to think we were just in a rut. Every relationship has those. Long hours, short tempers, drifting sleep schedules. But ruts don't come with contempt. They don't come with calculation. One night, I came home late. Meetings had run over. Traffic had been worse. I texted her. No reply. When I walked through the door, she was curled on the couch, wine glass in hand, laughing at something on her laptop. I said hi. She didn't look up. Just muttered, and kept scrolling. Like I was background noise. I sat beside her. She slid her legs away like I was a stranger, like my presence had interrupted a world she didn't invite me into. That was day one. Day two was colder. I made coffee for both of us, something I'd done every morning for years. She poured hers out in the sink without a word and walked away. No explanation. No glance. That afternoon, she posted a picture at a cafe we had once planned to visit together. Her caption read, "Finally doing things on my terms." She hadn't invited me, but she'd made sure I'd see it. By day three, it wasn't a pattern, it was a performance. We went to her friend's house for a small dinner. She wore a new dress and didn't say a word to me in the car. At the party, she smiled at everyone but me. She laughed a little louder than necessary. She leaned in a little too close when someone told a joke. And I stood in the corner, invisible in plain sight. Then I heard her voice from across the yard. She was talking to a circle of friends, half laughing, half performing. Marriage is just a game of chicken. You push until someone breaks. And he still hasn't. They laughed. She laughed. I didn't. I stood there holding two drinks, one for me, one for her, and I realized the line between testing and cruelty had disappeared. She wasn't trying to fight. She was trying to see if I'd break. I handed her the drink. She smiled like nothing happened. But something had. And the one thing she didn't count on was what would happen if I stopped playing. The thing about a slow shift is that it never announces itself. It creeps in through habits, through glances, through the space between what's said and what's meant. By the time you notice it, it's already done the damage. After that night at her friend's house, something in me stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. I didn't make excuses for her anymore. I didn't blame stress or hormones or work. I saw it for what it was. Testing, control, and something else underneath, disrespect wearing the mask of playfulness. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Played music while making avocado toast. Wore a bright-colored sweater and hummed like she was starring in her own personal rom-com. I watched her from the hallway. She didn't acknowledge me until I moved into her frame. Then a quick smile. Not warmth, acknowledgement. I started observing. She wasn't slipping. She was climbing. Building something. Momentum. The little digs, the social jabs, the coldness, they weren't reactions. They were rehearsals. That afternoon, I got a text from someone I barely knew. A mutual friend from her old office. We weren't close. We'd maybe had lunch once at a company picnic. He said, "Hey man, not sure if this is weird, but is everything okay between you two? Just saw something that felt off." No details. Just enough to confirm that I wasn't the only one seeing it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the point wasn't what she was doing. It was what I was allowing. That evening, I stayed late at work. Not because I had to, but because I wanted space. When I got home, she didn't ask where I'd been. She was sitting on the couch again, this time with a different glass in her hand, different pajamas, but the same posture. Like nothing mattered enough to notice. I sat down next to her without saying anything. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. Her body language was static, like she was tolerating my presence, not welcoming it. That's when I knew. She'd made the shift long before I caught on. And now, she was waiting to see how long I'd cling to what no longer existed. But I didn't react. I didn't accuse her. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't beg for softness. I simply stopped filling the gaps. That night, I lay beside her without touching her. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, while she drifted off, peaceful, indifferent, victorious. But what she didn't know was that the man beside her wasn't the same one she'd worn down over the past week. That man was gone. And the version that had taken his place? He was watching, quietly, strategically, waiting for the right moment not to confront her, but to vanish. People talk about betrayal like it's loud, like it kicks in a door or breaks a glass. But real betrayal is quiet. It wears your clothes. It uses your Wi-Fi. It finishes the sentence for you and then goes silent when the truth gets too close. I didn't go looking for proof, but it came anyway. It was a Tuesday. She left her laptop open on the dining table, something she rarely did. Normally, it was glued to her lap or stashed in her bag before I even walked in the room. This time, it was just there, still humming. A tab open in the corner. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. The preview told me enough. A chat window. A name I didn't recognize. A message with a timestamp. Last night was wild. Still thinking about that walk. You really wore me out. I just stood there for a moment, breathing in the weight of something I hadn't said out loud, but had already accepted. She walked in minutes later, unfazed, sipping almond milk like it was a normal day. Saw me near the table, barely blinked. She closed the screen in one fluid motion and asked if we were out of eggs. I said nothing. Because what do you say when someone's daring you to react? When their entire performance is built on the assumption that you'll either blow up or fall apart? I didn't do either. That night, I stared at her from across the dinner table. She was talking about something shallow, her new podcast obsession or a funny TikTok. Her eyes never fully met mine. She laughed at the right beats, played her role, but she didn't ask me anything. Not really. She didn't notice I hadn't shaved. Didn't notice I hadn't eaten most of my food. She didn't notice that the man across from her had already left the room emotionally days ago. What I felt wasn't rage. It was confirmation. And that hit harder than any argument ever could. The next morning, I canceled a few recurring transfers from our joint account. Just a few small things, her subscription boxes, some premium streaming services, a luxury skincare plan I never used. She didn't notice. Not yet. But she would. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was just done funding the illusion. At work, I found myself sharper, quieter. People asked if everything was okay, and I just nodded. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't confused. I didn't need answers. I had evidence. Not to fight with, to act on. She still texted during the day, but less and less. Sometimes just a meme or "you good," with no real curiosity behind it. I replied only when I felt like it. And sometimes, not at all. The distance between us stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like a forecast. Something predictable. I could see the storm on the horizon, and this time, I wasn't planning to take shelter. I was planning to step out of the way and let it pass. Because the truth was no longer the problem. It was the silence after it. The silence where I used to offer peace, and now I offered nothing. I didn't slam a door. I didn't pack a suitcase in the middle of the night. I didn't yell or leave a note. I just disappeared. Quietly, intentionally, and with more clarity than I'd felt in months. It started small. I turned off my location sharing. I paused our shared calendar invites. Canceled dinner plans she'd agreed to without ever checking if I wanted to go. I stopped announcing when I'd be home. And then one morning, I didn't come back at all. I booked a 3-night stay in a mid-tier hotel downtown. Nothing fancy. Just quiet. Neutral. Unfamiliar. A space that didn't have her fingerprints on the walls or her voice echoing in the corners. She didn't notice I was gone until that evening. Her first text came around 6. Running late. The second hit closer to 10. You're not coming home? I read both. Said nothing. That was the difference between punishment and boundary. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't lashing out. I was reclaiming air. In the hotel room, I ordered simple food. No music. No TV. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that didn't require me to tiptoe around mood swings or guess which version of her I'd be greeted by. I opened my laptop and started looking into things I had avoided. Solo accounts, asset separation, contingency plans. Not with panic. Not even with urgency. Just calm. Because once you see clearly, your steps slow down. Your decisions sharpen. Back home, she kept testing. Sent a photo of a bottle of wine. Followed it with a half-hearted joke about me ghosting her. I didn't reply. By day 2, she was calling. Once in the morning, twice by lunch. I let them ring. When you take someone's favorite toy away, they don't panic right away. They assume you'll give it back. They laugh, then pout. Then finally, when they realize they don't control the outcome, they start to break. She was still on stage, but I had left the audience. By the end of day 3, I stopped checking the messages entirely. I sat by the hotel window that night and stared down at the traffic lights blinking across wet asphalt. And I realized something that hadn't occurred to me until then. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing control over the version of me who tolerated everything. The version who waited, who gave her space, who chased harmony while she rehearsed cruelty. And now he was gone. Not in anger, not in protest, but in resolve. I didn't need to announce it. She'd feel the shift soon enough. She thought I hadn't seen him. She thought I didn't know. The man behind the messages. The one from her office. The same name that appeared in that chat preview days earlier. The one whose voice she suddenly quoted in stories. The colleague she only referred to as just funny, just smart, just helpful. The first time I saw them together, it wasn't planned. I had left the hotel to grab coffee, a spot near the park. I wasn't hiding, but she didn't see me. She was outside, sitting on the bench, facing him. Not touching, but the posture told its own story. Comfortable, open, the kind of body language you forget how to fake when someone makes you feel seen. He leaned in once, laughed at something. She tilted her head, smiled, brushed something off her knee that wasn't there. And that was all I needed. I didn't react. I didn't interrupt. I didn't take photos or storm across the street. I just stood for one extra minute, long enough to memorize the moment, then turned and walked away. No faster than usual. No slower. I didn't need to confront him. I just needed to understand what mattered to him. And the thing about men like him? It's never just attention. It's access, influence, image. He wasn't a threat because she liked him. He was a threat because he didn't expect to be watched. Later that night, I opened my laptop. I didn't dig into her messages. I dug into him. His professional bio, social profiles, vendor connections, corporate filings. I wasn't hunting secrets. I was looking for pressure points. And I found one. A contract he failed to disclose. Not illegal, just murky. Connected to a side business that could have raised questions. And the timing? Sloppy. A shared vendor. No firewall between roles. I didn't leak it. I just forwarded the summary to someone in compliance. No name. No return address. Just enough breadcrumbs to trigger review. That week, she came home tight-jawed. Distracted. She didn't bring up the man once, but I noticed she wasn't quoting him anymore. He disappeared from conversation. From stories. From the smile she wore when she scrolled through her phone. She hadn't figured it out yet. She hadn't connected the dots. But the circle was shrinking. He was retreating, and I hadn't said a word. That's the thing about power. It doesn't shout. It moves the room without asking permission. It rearranges people's confidence. Quietly. Permanently. She had been building a dynamic where I was the blind one. The passive one. The fool. And now, without warning, the safety net she didn't know she needed had started to tear. I wasn't punishing her. I was reminding her. Not through threats. Through silence. Because when the wrong people start to fall away, and you can't explain why, you start to wonder who pulled the thread. It's one thing to lose control behind closed doors. It's another to lose it in front of people who once looked up to you. The shift started slow. A few missed calls from her friends. Messages she didn't answer right away. Then, gradually, the invitations stopped coming. The group chats dried up. The ones she used to gossip with now left her on scene. And she felt it. At first, she brushed it off. Claimed she was just busy, taking space, too tired to go out. But I watched her pacing the hallway at night, refreshing feeds that didn't feature her anymore. Saw her scrolling through old photos like they owed her attention. The mirror, once her favorite stage, became something she avoided. She didn't talk about her friends like she used to. Didn't laugh at their inside jokes. Because the audience was thinning, and her performance had nowhere left to land. I hadn't said a word to any of them. I didn't need to. People don't walk away from the joyful. They walk away from discomfort. From arrogance that starts to crack. From cruelty that's no longer masked by charm. She thought she could keep up appearances. Smile through it. Pretend nothing had shifted. But there was one thing she couldn't fake, the absence of warmth. And people noticed. Her sister called one afternoon. I answered by habit. There was a pause, then a question that told me everything. Is everything okay between you two? I didn't lie. I didn't explain. I just said, we're figuring things out. Because silence wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a filter. One that showed everyone who had been doing the work and who had been coasting. At a family gathering a week later, the energy changed. Her father asked me how I was doing, not her. Her aunt pulled me aside and said, "You've been quieter than usual." She noticed. The room that once revolved around her was shifting on its axis. And she hated it. I stayed polite, calm. I smiled when spoken to. I helped clean up. I was present, but not engaged. And in that space, the truth became visible. Not spoken, just sensed. She pulled me into the hallway once, away from the others. Asked what I was doing. Nothing, I said. But that was the problem. I wasn't playing along anymore. And without my participation, the image she'd built, the stable marriage, the supportive husband, the curated life, started to crack under its own weight. She returned to the living room alone. And this time, no one asked where I was. Because they already knew. Not the details. Not the story. But the energy. And that was enough. Because in the absence of affection, people see character. And what they saw in her now was something they'd ignored for too long. Not out of malice. Out of denial. That night, as we drove home in silence, she didn't reach for the radio. She didn't check her phone. She just stared out the window, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Not because I embarrassed her, but because, for the first time, I didn't protect her. The silence stopped being a tactic. It became the new language between us. She was still in the house, still moving through it, still making her morning smoothies, still taking her calls on speakerphone like nothing had changed. But the space between us had thickened into something colder than resentment, indifference. She didn't know how to fight that. She knew how to provoke, how to charm, how to retreat, and then reappear with a new version of herself. But she didn't know how to exist in a house where I no longer reached for her, no longer tried to soothe, explain, or fix. I had always been the bridge, between our silences, between her moods, between who she was in private and who she pretended to be in public. Now that the bridge was gone, all she had was her own echo. At first, she tried to pretend it didn't affect her. She upped her performance. Extra makeup, tighter outfits, louder laughs when she answered video calls. But even mirrors get tired of being stared at. I caught her scrolling through old photos one night. The kind we hadn't taken in years. Vacations, birthdays, blurry restaurant selfies. She zoomed in on my face in one of them and just stared. Not smiling, not nostalgic, just searching. She started checking in more, not out of care, but out of suspicion. Asking where I was going, what I was doing. I gave her nothing. Because this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. The more she reached for me, the less she found. And in that emptiness, she began to lose control, not in public, but privately, quietly, emotionally. I'd hear her on the phone late at night, talking to people who used to be her sounding board. Her voice was different now, cautious, low. She didn't brag anymore. She asked questions like she was hoping someone else could explain what was happening between us. But no one could, because this wasn't a conflict she could narrate her way out of. I still did my part, paid the bills, replaced the light bulbs, took the trash out. But I no longer asked how her day was, no longer lingered in doorways or kissed her goodnight. I moved through the house like a guest she never invited, clean, quiet, untraceable. And she felt it. Not because I was absent, but because I was right there, and no longer reachable. That's the kind of distance you can't close with an apology. She started going out more. Dinners with coworkers. Solo shopping trips. At first, she thought absence would draw me back. It didn't, because she hadn't left a hole behind. She just made room for more clarity. One evening, I passed by the bedroom and found her curled up, phone in hand, reading something. She didn't hear me. She looked small, not in size, in spirit. And it hit me, not as triumph, but as recognition. She wasn't the one I'd fallen for. She was the version that had grown from being unchecked, unchallenged, and constantly indulged. And now she was shrinking in the face of someone who'd finally stopped feeding the fire. I didn't hate her, but I didn't miss her either. And that was new. She finally asked. Not with fire, not with rage. Just a quiet knock on the guest room door and a sentence that hung too long in the air. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. I folded my shirt, placed it carefully in the drawer, then turned and nodded. She sat at the edge of the bed like a visitor in someone else's house. Her back was straight, hands folded in her lap, a picture of restraint, not remorse. I don't know what's happening, she said. But she did. She just didn't know how to stop it now that it wasn't on her terms. I stayed quiet, not out of spite, but because I had nothing to add. Everything that needed to be said had already been shown. She spoke again, slower this time, like she was building a case. If you're upset, you can say it. You always used to say it. I looked at her, not through her, at her, like I was seeing a stranger wearing someone else's face. I'm not upset, I said finally. Just finished. She blinked. That wasn't the line she rehearsed for. She wanted frustration, accusation, anything she could twist into an argument and use as proof that I still cared enough to react. But I didn't react. Because I wasn't angry. I was done. She stood, began to pace. Tried to force movement into a space I had already made still. So what? You're just walking away? I didn't answer. That was the problem. She was used to debates, disagreements, even silence, but only when she was the one choosing it. What she wasn't ready for was peace she hadn't earned. She started listing things, memories, hard years, sacrifices. Like history was currency and she could still buy back my patience. I listened. Not because I cared to, but because I wanted her to hear her own voice echoing in a room that no longer agreed. When she finished, I stood. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just leaving the version of myself that allowed all of this. She froze. Because that's what hurt the most, the idea that I could move on without asking her permission. She whispered something under her breath. I didn't catch it, and I didn't ask her to repeat it. I walked past her, down the hallway, and into the kitchen. Not storming. Just walking. As if it were any other day. But for her, it wasn't. That night, she stayed up late, pacing the living room while I read quietly in the other room. She was looking for a switch to flip, a phrase to trigger the old me. But that version of me had stopped showing up the moment she proved he wasn't needed. I went to bed without saying goodnight. She stood in the doorway for a while, silhouetted against the hallway light. Waiting. But I didn't turn. And in that stillness, she saw it. She wasn't fighting a man anymore. She was chasing his absence. The collapse didn't come with a scream. It came with silence. Subtle, steady, and public. I watched it unfold like a spectator at a slow-motion implosion, the kind where the building doesn't crash all at once, but begins to lean, buckle, hesitate, and then gives in. She started unraveling on the outside. It began with little things. Missed calls from her job. Emails flagged, urgent, left unanswered. A friend texting me, not her, asking if everything was okay. She hadn't shown up to a planning meeting. She never missed meetings. She told them she was just tired. But exhaustion wasn't her style. She lived on chaos. She thrived on noise. Now the silence she'd once weaponized was circling back. Only it wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. At home, she moved like a ghost of her former self. No makeup. No carefully curated morning outfits. She sat at the kitchen island longer than she needed to, scrolling her phone with eyes that didn't track. Sometimes she'd stop mid-scroll and just stare. I had already moved on internally. New routines. A gym across town. Lunches with colleagues she never met. I was out the door early and home late. And when I was home, I was unreadable. She began to ask questions again. But not like before. No attitude. No challenge. They were quieter now. Hesitant. Like she was unsure she still had the right. I answered when I felt like it. Calm. Measured. Short. She tried to connect. A sudden offer to cook dinner. A comment about a show we used to watch together. Even laughter at something I said, but laughter that didn't land. Because I wasn't joking. She was trying to pull me back into a story she had already destroyed the plot of. And people started to notice. At a dinner with friends, mutual friends, she arrived first, dressed like old times. I came in late, sat 2 seats down. She kept glancing my way like she was waiting for me to catch her eye. I never did. The others picked up on it. The conversation shifted. People spoke to her with polite restraint. No longer inside jokes, no teasing. Just short replies and glances passed between them. The kind you trade when someone's mask slips, but they won't admit it. She was slipping. Later that night, back at home, she broke the quiet. Not with anger, but desperation. You don't see me anymore. I looked at her, then past her. I did. You just looked away too long. Her face crumpled just slightly. Not tears, not yet, but the kind of bend in the structure you know won't hold much longer. And still, I didn't move toward her. Didn't reach. Because I had already made peace with the fact that I didn't need to rescue the version of her that built a fire just to see if I'd burn. She began losing her rhythm. Showing up late. Canceling plans. Walking around the house like a displaced version of herself. And every so often, she'd look at me like she was trying to remember who she used to be when I still chased her. But I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. She didn't fall apart all at once. She dimmed. And in that fading, she finally realized something brutal. It wasn't my absence that broke her. It was my presence without permission. The ending didn't arrive with drama. It didn't need an audience. There was no slammed door, no suitcases at the curb. Just a moment, still, sharp, and final. I came home on a Thursday. Early. Not to return, but to close the loop. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still dressed from work, but already undone. Shoes off, sleeves rolled up, a half-finished glass of water beside her. She looked up when I entered, surprised, then cautious. "You're home early," she said. It wasn't a question, more like a probe, trying to feel out the reason before I gave it to her. I didn't answer. I walked past her, through the hallway, into the bedroom. Picked up the last few things I hadn't bothered to take before. Small stuff. A tie clip, a watch box, a hardcover I'd started months ago. I didn't rush. I moved like I had all the time in the world. When I came back out, she was standing now. Barefoot, arms folded. She wasn't angry. She wasn't apologizing. She was just waiting. Like maybe if she said nothing long enough, I'd speak first. But I had already said everything I needed to. "I don't understand," she said quietly. That was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. She didn't understand how someone who'd once waited at the door with open hands now walked through it, without even looking back. She didn't understand how silence could weigh more than words. How absence could be louder than confrontation. I looked at her, really looked, and I felt nothing. Not resentment. Not regret. Just release. "You could have told me," she said. "You could have fought." That was her language. Fight, resist, react. She thought effort looked like conflict. She thought silence was surrender. But it never was. "I did tell you," I said, my voice low. "Just not in ways you chose to hear." She took a step forward. "So that's it." I paused. Not for effect. Just to feel the weight of what came next. "That's everything." She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She stood there like someone watching the last bus pull away from a station she thought would stay open forever. I walked to the door. Placed my keys on the counter. Clean, quiet, final. And then, just before I stepped outside, I turned to her. She stood in the middle of the room, arms still crossed, like she was holding herself together from the inside. I looked her in the eyes, not to hurt her, not to impress her, but to make sure the moment registered. So there would be no rewriting it later. And I said the last thing I ever needed to say. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Then I left. Not in anger, not in pain, but in peace. A peace she had mistaken for weakness. A peace she would never be able to reach again. And in that silence I left behind, I knew it would echo longer than anything I ever said out loud. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.